Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flex here with a review for Gojira, also known as Godzilla King of the Monsters in stateside. My review is going to comprise both films, but my main focus is going to be on Gojira. First up, what is it about this movie that makes it so goddamn great? I think this is one of the certainly I think it's the strongest monster kaiju movie ever made. It is absolutely pristine and perfect at bringing you a very clear and palpable threat that is both villainous and also not villainous. The ultimate villain of this film is man, and what man is capable of doing or unleashing on the world. This is a film whose allegory is that it was Godzilla plays as the allegory of the ghost of the atomic bomb that dropped on Japan, and you get to see what happened to that nation through two atomic attacks with this monster. And this isn't just a monster that comes through and crushes buildings, which he very much does, but this is something that his trail that he leaves behind is just as devastating as he leaves behind radiation. Something that doesn't really continue on as the franchise moves forward, but that's something that's very apparent here. And it's a slow burn before you get Godzilla. This is a tight, 90-minute movie, and it flows like a river. It moves you through, but it helps that it's pulling you in through the story of, first you're just hearing this lumberous monster, and you get this attack on a boating ship where everybody dies except for one person who's traumatized with radiation poisoning and later dies, and then you get sucked into this island, and you're hearing reports of other attacks of boating ships, and you see multiple getting destroyed. Then when you're pulled into the island and you're hearing the story, the folklore of this beast worshipped like a god, and then all of a sudden the god manifests the next day after a hurricane the night before. When Godzilla first shows, it is powerful. You're hearing this big thudding boom, 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 boom as he approaches, and you get just a glimpse of him, and then he walks away. You don't get to see what he's capable of, but you've been hearing about it throughout the movie until that point, seeing just little bits of his destruction. It is when he comes onto the mainland that you get the full glimpse of what Godzilla is capable of doing and the trauma that he causes. And all of this is interrupted with little bits of human character moments. This is important because were it not for these little bits of character moments, both in the Japanese cut and the American cut, I think that what they do with Raymond Burr is really quite nice. It's not nearly as good as the storyline developed for the three leads of the Japanese one, but the fact that you have this monster movie driven by these characters that you grow to care about very much, and when some of them maybe get injured or taken away by film's end, you feel it and it resonates hard, is a biting criticism of the films that are about to come later, particularly some of those American features. But we will get to them. I do plan on doing this is going to be a retrospective series periodically, because I'm a fan of this franchise, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But why does this film work as well as it does? I think you're having a person from the nation wherein the only nation that has experienced a nuclear tragedy that was done to them willfully by another force, who is discussing the dangers of science and the dangers of this kind of weaponry through an open, bleeding heart. It's honest, shockingly honest, and an incredibly somber film, and it hurts to watch at times because you do find yourself caring about these people. And this film is very smart in that it cuts to the destruction of what Godzilla does, and you get to see firsthand what the experience of them seeing this creature is like, them getting traumatized, but then you're spending a lot of time with the aftermath and the people who are injured and dying in the hospitals and stuff like that, or the safe zones where they're getting treated. You have the beautiful song that is sung by the all-girl choir that is just haunting and moving. But that's something that doesn't really come later. This is a horror movie, and it works as a horror movie, not necessarily because the creature is so horrific looking, though I do think that there's one or two shots, particularly when he's attacking the mainland, and you have the mother who's cradling her children saying that we're going to join your father, sweeties, or whatever, implying that they died in the war, or whatever, or he died in the war. You have a shot of Godzilla looming over the building, and it's just a terrifying shot. I saw this in the theater when it was on its 50th anniversary release, and it was the first time Gojira was shown theatrically stateside. And I remember being I'd seen this movie in its American form dozens of times before, like dozens of times before, probably northward of 100 times. When that moment hit me on the big screen, seeing the size of him on the scale of a giant theater screen is actually pretty stunning, but coupled with the moment that leads up to that is traumatizingly horrifying. It is one of the scariest moments I've ever had through a classic horror film. But it's not scary only because you have a scary monster. You have a scary implication of the dangers man can manifest. Godzilla came about because of he was unleashed because of what man was capable of doing, what man did to that country. And you have a mad scientist character in Dr. Serizawa, and the brilliant thing the screenplay does is they make him incredibly sympathetic throughout the entire feature, where he is a mad scientist, creator of this weapon that's even more destructive than Godzilla, implying there's always going to be something bigger around the corner, something more destructive that can be made next. And he is just weighted with guilt. He is riddled with the implications of what he has created. And he is the character that gets sacrificed, or sacrifices himself to reach the film's conclusion, before I can't remember his name, the old man from Akiru and Seven Samurai, has his little soliloquy at the end about the dangers of man and science and stuff like that. He's a brilliant character. I've always loved Dr. Serizawa, not only because he has the coolest name in of all the mad scientist doctor characters, I think his is ultimately the coolest. Frankenstein, close second, but Dr. Serizawa, what a great character. And that's unusual. I mentioned Frankenstein, which is creates a direct correlation, in that is also a both film and book about a mad scientist and science gone wrong and the implications therein. But the framework of those of a mad scientist story is often to not humanize them as much as this character, Dr. Serizawa. Now, in the film, Dr. Frankenstein was humanized far more than he was in the book. In the book, he is ultimately the story's villain. Frankenstein in the movie is painted a little more heroic, but that's just it. He has strokes of tragedy, but ultimately he's kind of painted a more heroic figure that faces tragedy by his film's end as well. contrast that with Dr. Serizawa. There's almost no heroic aspects of it, and anytime somebody tries to thrust a heroic aspect to what he is doing, he shuts it aside because he is disgusted with what he is capable of, and therefore what man or science is capable of producing. It's great. The film focuses on a pseudo-soft love triangle with the Emiko character, and I like how it's there, but they don't lean into it like fully and stuff like that. But you're spending a lot of time with these three characters, and juxtaposing it with like also the bureaucracy of scientists discussing what should we do with Godzilla and stuff like that. That's something that will become a big part of a later Godzilla reimagining. I'm excited to talk about Shin Godzilla at some point. But anyway, the seeds of that start here, where you have the bureaucracy of what to do with this traumatic event that is like walking your way. And that is speaks volumes about the status of the world that we are in and still living in to this day. It's interesting to note that this film, when it originally came out in Japan, was not particularly well liked. It got mostly mixed reviews, and one of the major, larger criticisms that this film faced was the sincerity of it, and the fact that you had a firm stance on its nuclear war and their place or involvement in it that did not seem to be appreciated much at the time. In fact, the rumor has it that the reviews for Godzilla Raids Again, the sequel film, was reviewed far better than this film, and that film largely strips away a little more of the political aspects of the feature. But it is those same aspects, those political leanings that the film projects, that you got released stateside and other places, that are what people were kind of drawn to. They liked the allegorical atomic threat and that aspect of it, which was somewhat slammed in the Japanese culture, was embraced in its foreign markets. Heavily so in the United States, though the United States did trim back any direct references to the bombings in Japan. But the subtleties of storytelling are still intact in that American one. The American one kind of does get some criticism that I think is undue. And I do think that there are two things that work really well with Godzilla King of the Monsters. One of which is the Raymond Burr character. Rather than give us just the full feature film of Gojira, which maybe audiences, especially still trying to pull themselves out of a mindset less than 10 years afterwards, where they viewed Japan and Japanese people as the villains, wrongfully. That's its own thing. But condemning, okay, I'll say it right now. I think condemning an entire race of people over a war that is in the past and still holding on to that hatred of Asian people and what we did as our own country with our own forms of concentration camps, internment camps for Japanese people is never okay. So anyway, what this film, the American version of this film did was it gave us a sort of stock American figure to latch onto. Well, they kind of trimmed the film up a little bit, took out some of the redundant Godzilla attacks on boats early on, trimmed some of that back, and gave this character, who is an American character, having absolutely no problem conducting and treating maturely these Japanese people in their own setting. I think that actually probably did a lot of good whether intentional or not. So there is that, and I think the handling and the way that Raymond Burr's character is written into the story, as journalist Steve Martin, who's like a first-hand account of what's happening, is an excellent way to communicate to an audience who is experiencing a foreign film a great in. It's kind of brilliant, and the insertion of his character is woven so effectively that the first time that I saw the Japanese cut of the film, I'd heard that the Japanese cut was longer and different, and Raymond Burr wasn't in it, and I was curious to see how that was. But the first time I actually saw it, I couldn't believe how same but different it was, and the fact that I watched that movie and I fell in love with it. I do think the Japanese version is the better cut, but it made me go home and rewatch Godzilla King of the Monsters again and just watch in awe at how that was edited and strung through and written in organically into the story. It is really quite stunning. The other benefit that Godzilla King of the Monster has that I think actually works better in that film versus Gojira is Dr. Serizawa's sacrifice is kind of telegraphed in the Japanese cut and is a complete and utter shock in the American cut of the film. I do think that is handled better, and having grown up watched that one, I do remember being in abject shock when a main character dies. This was one of my first experiences where a main character died and stayed dead. It wasn't like Obi-Wan getting cut in half and then all of a sudden showing up as a ghost later in the film, through his voice, but also in Empire Strikes Back. When Dr. Serizawa dies, he dies. And there's no coming back from it. This was one of my first exposures to a film death, and I remember being really surprised by that. And I couldn't believe when I saw the Japanese cut in 2004 that the film, once they introduced that Serizawa has this a great weapon, you don't get to see what it is until a little bit later, but you're aware that he has this. Once he makes the decision that he is going to join, he almost flat out says that he's going to do this. It's going to die with him, and then he dies. So I do think that the American tinkering really benefited that aspect of the story. But yeah, this is one of my favorite films. Growing up, this was one of the first films that I attached a hardcore fandom to. I remember watching Godzilla, just being absolutely falling in love with this character. And so my dad took me, he'd seen it as a kid and whatnot, and he'd seen a handful of them, but he took me to the video store and we kept renting them. And when they the video store we had only had about 4 or 5 of them. The features, there were 17 out at the time, and this was 1989 or so. We started going to other mom and pop video shops, and I was able to add 3 or 4 more to that. And it ended up being, then we ended up going to Suncoast, and I picked up not only my favorite ones, but whatever ones that they had. And it got to be where I saw 11 or 12 out of the original 17 films, everything up till Biollante. I was able to see about 12 of those films, and I was in love with them, and I watched them on repeat, but none more than Godzilla King of the Monsters. That was always my go-to. I think it is the best kaiju movie. King Kong can give Godzilla King of the Monsters or Gojira a run for its money, but I think especially with Gojira being as incredibly strong, and I have zero complaints about that film as it is, it ages infinitely better than King Kong with all of its many problematic narrative choices. And so even through that lens, but even not through that lens, King Kong I don't think is as streamlined of this is Gojira has perfect 90-minute story, and it just flows. King Kong like has ups and downs and hills and valleys, and sometimes like when it slaps, that film slaps, but when it doesn't, there's a long time where you're kind of sitting there marinating about what you've been watching in a not so good way, where you're just kind of like, doesn't he punch a dinosaur at some point? And then he does, and you're awesome. So anyway, that isn't to say that King Kong isn't a great film. King Kong is certainly a great film. But yeah. I fell very much in love with Godzilla until I kind of fell off the Godzilla train somewhere around 1998 when an American version of it came out. And I didn't really revisit much of Godzilla until like 2003-ish, when I started seeing some of the more later Godzilla ones. Yeah, like I was so obsessed for a while that I saw as everything that I could for Godzilla, but then that American one I had grown such a distaste for that, like when Godzilla 2000 came out, theatrically, I didn't even see it. I can't believe that I didn't see a Godzilla movie in the theater when given an option to. But then I saw Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, All Monsters, All Out Attack, or whatever. It has the silliest title. That kind of pulled me into the Godzilla loop again. And then when the 50th anniversary came out and we got to see Gojira, that gave me the whole Godzilla love one more time. And I haven't really let it go. It helps that we've gotten some pretty strong Godzilla movies afterwards. Godzilla Final Wars came out, which is just pure blissful fun, and then Shin Godzilla, and there's aspects of the second American Godzilla that I like, and I'll discuss when I get to them. I plan on doing a series, a franchise review periodically, every couple of weeks or something. You'll get a new one. But yeah. So, what did you think of Gojira? Do you have a preference over Gojira or Godzilla King of the Monsters? It is on Criterion. If you buy Gojira on through their Criterion, you get Godzilla King of the Monsters as a supplement material. If you are able to, I highly recommend my copy of the Godzilla flip book that has all the features of the Showa era, which is the first 15 feature films. Granted, the Showa era is, even though it's the one that kind of got me most interested in Godzilla, is also mostly my least favorite. Like if I were going to whittle down the franchise to its essential, like 5, 6, 7 movies, I think I'd only have like maybe 2 or 3 of these films in it, and considering that this era had the most installments, it's kind of telling, and the ones that I like aren't necessarily the ones that most people do, so there's that. But yeah, so I will be coming at you with some thoughts on later Godzilla fare as time goes by. But let me know, which did you prefer? You can even drop down in the comments what your favorite Godzilla movie is, or your favorite Kaiju movie. Which Kaiju monster do you prefer over Godzilla? I always liked Godzilla. I actually saw Godzilla, weirdly enough, because I was watching, I think it was Turner Classic Movies with my dad once, and we were watching Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and I loved the giant monster at the end, and he got me into King Kong and Godzilla shortly afterwards, and I just found out not too long ago that Godzilla came about because of Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, so I think we have that film to thank for this one. Though this one is infinitely better, but I will touch on Beast from 20,000 Fathoms on a future review because I think it's incredibly relevant to your appreciation of later film. But anyway, drop all the questions I just asked you in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, do all that. Thank you for watching, and peace.